So thank you, Lloyd, for the smudging and Carola for the teaching. And we welcome, good evening to all of you online and here on site in person. And welcome to this first session of the Reconciliation Through Justice sessions. We thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight as we move from our year-long Together We Heal sessions to this new series. And right off the bat, we'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground and home of the First Nations, including treaty signatories, and especially the homeland of the Métis, who have deep roots in this historical site, and especially one of our presenters tonight, certainly, one of the first families here, I believe. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live in this territory and commit ourselves to the ongoing journey of healing and reconciliation. And now I'd like to invite Lloyd to read us a main drum song.
So I'm going to sing you guys an honor song, and we'll stand if you can. Right? And this song comes from Edmund Bull. He's from the Satellite Cree Nation. And they're the Red Bull singers, but not like a Red Bull energy drink, like red bison bull, right? And it's a song like I've heard words to it. I won't sing it with the words, but the words speak to the creator, like, you know, God, right? And it basically thanks God for the children, the creator that he sends to this world. And at the same time, in the song, it says how much we love our children, right? And with that, I'll sing the song.
Yeah, 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 hey, oh, hey, oh, yeah, 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 hey, oh, hey, oh,
Thank you, Lloyd, for that honor song. Please be seated. So Sister Maria Hel, who is on the camera tonight, and who has created rituals for us over the past year, which we really value, or even more than that, has created an appropriate one for this evening on housing, utilizing a children's playhouse supplied by Clint. So we're going to hear quotations from the wisdom of Pope Francis in Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. And after each quotation, we will place placards highlighting key elements for proper housing: shelter, security, intimacy, identity, belonging, and stability. And so we listen to Laudato Si number 152. Having a home has much to do with a sense of personal dignity and growth of families. This is a major issue for human ecology.
Stability. Identity.
And from Fratelli Tutti number 106. Social friendship and universal fraternity necessarily call for an acknowledgement of the worth of every human person, always and everywhere. If each individual is of such great worth, it must be stated clearly and firmly that the mere fact that some people are born in places with fewer resources or less development does not justify the fact that they must live with less dignity. This is a basic principle of social life that tends to be ignored in a variety of ways by those who sense that it does not fit into their worldview or serve their purposes.
Belonging and intimacy.
And from Fratelli Tutti number 116, solidarity means much more than engaging in sporadic acts of generosity. It means thinking and acting in terms of community. It means that the lives of all are prior to the appropriation of goods by a few. It also means combating the structural causes of poverty, inequality, the lack of work, land, and housing, the denial of social and labor rights. It means confronting the destructive effects of the empire of money. Solidarity, understood in its most profound meaning, is a way of making history, and this is what popular movements are doing.
Shelter and security.
So now the second phase of the ritual, we will name situations in which there is no home or a very poor one, and drop a placard on the floor each time. Evicted single-parent families.
Intimacy.
Addictions leading to eviction.
Identity.
Homelessness.
Shelter.
Overcrowded housing.
Belonging.
An irregular income that does not allow one to maintain a fixed rent. See,
Security. Oh, please.
and an insufficient minimum income. So these placards will remain as a symbol for us of the devastating effects of lack of arrangements for proper housing for people as we move into our conference. So very appropriately, tomorrow, September 30th, marks the second official National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This is a day to recognize and reflect on the history and legacy of the residential school system in Canada, and to honor survivors, their families, and communities. Also known as Orange Shirt Day, people across Canada wear orange and participate in and host events to commemorate this day. And our Sacred Heart tomorrow is an event at 3 o'clock, I believe. I'll try to be there. We recognize that one day to commemorate victims and survivors of Canada's colonial past is not enough. Ultimately, for truth and reconciliation to prevail in Canada, our efforts must be a daily commitment. We take up this challenge wholeheartedly and want to take action for forging a national identity wherein reconciliation is centered. So the Together We Heal sessions over the past year here at the Star have been an effort on our part to move forward together towards deeper reconciliation. So to continue this process in a more focused way, we're now holding the present reconciliation through justice sessions on housing, land, and water. And this first session, as you know, is on housing. So we're grateful for the presence of our two presenters tonight, Fred Gload from Ottawa and Carola Cunningham here in person. Fred was born on the Shubenacadie First Nation in Nova Scotia. I've been there. They do great artwork with wood. And moved to Ontario with his family as a youth. He obtained a master's in arts from Wilfrid Laurier University with a specialty in measurement and cross-cultural studies. Throughout his career in public service, he held roles of leadership and management. As chair of the National Council of Aboriginal Employees, his strong administrative skills helped him develop a solid infrastructure for the hiring, retention, and advancement process for Aboriginals in the federal government. Fred was also vice president of the Gignul and Matawan nonprofit corporations, both committed to a holistic and comprehensive approach to housing, including both Aboriginals at risk of losing their homes and those who are homeless. Prior to his retirement, so I guess he's like me, somewhat retired, he was chief audit and evaluation executive for the Indian Residential Schools Resolution Canada and worked in the services group for the TRC. So along with performing elder services, Fred is currently assisting First Nations on various management issues and co-chair for the St. Vincent de Paul Housing Initiative, exploring Indigenous housing in the Ottawa area. His approach to culture and modern management practices allows Indigenous organizations to quickly resolve potential problems. So Fred will give us, I guess, an Eastern perspective on Indigenous housing. And our second presenter, Carola Cunningham, I found out is Dr. Carola, has over 40 years of experience in education, justice, community wellness, and addictions recovery, mostly here in the Edmonton area, I believe. She has designed, developed, and delivered programming specifically tailored to the needs of the Indigenous community, and in particular, those that have high-risk lifestyles. Throughout her career, Carola has demonstrated a strong dedication towards bridging cultural differences and creating understanding. And this work continues in her role as CEO of Niginan Housing Ventures that builds, designs, and develops housing initiatives primarily for Indigenous people, such as Ambrose Place here in Edmonton, a harm reduction permanent supportive housing program that is guided from an Indigenous worldview perspective. And she will give us a more local and Western perspective on housing in the light of Fred's presentation. So we'll be turning things over to Fred, first of all, and I'm not sure Carola might be stepping in or not. Otherwise, she'll just respond and we'll go from there with sharing and discussions after. So welcome, Fred, in Ottawa. Thanks for being with us.
I will turn on my microphone. That's the always a trick on virtual meetings is making sure you're clicking the right buttons. I think Clint has a deck that he'll be putting up, and I'm hoping Carola will jump in into my presentation and to provide some input because I'm dealing with the strictly urban Aboriginal perspective, although many of the issues really stem from the reserve-based system. So first of all, next slide, please, Clint. Thanks. We'll be talking tonight about our consultations. When we started out this project, St. Vincent de Paul was just moving into this housing area, and so we did consultations. We looked at the needs in the area, and we started looking at projects and what's being done. And we've also we want to talk about what we've done to pursue funding as we move forward. And Clint, you can move to the next. Thanks. So St. Vincent de Paul launched a multi-year housing campaign in February 2021, and we actually have just been up and running for a little over a year, and we have moved very quickly with the help of my co-chair Brian DePape. Brian DePape and I have worked together for over 20 years. We worked together at Indian Affairs, and he also helped out at Indian Residential School. So it's always good to partner with people we've worked with in the past. But our goal was to address the housing needs in our community, and St. Vincent de Paul was really there to support moving this whole agenda forward. Next, please. Thanks, Clint. So we spent about 6 months, learning all about the different needs in our areas and who are our partners in the areas. We partnered with the Archdiocese of Ottawa, Cornwall, also with the Anglican Church, the Muslim community, and the Jewish community in this area. And one of our main partners that we've developed a relationship with is called the Multi-Faith Housing Initiative, who has become one of the largest nonprofit housing providers in this area. And they've been a pleasure to work with. And we're going to be talking about 2 projects that we're working with them now. Next slide, Clint, please. So first of all, the need. The needs that we've discovered is that there's been a 100% increase in the house values from 2006 to 2021 just in Ottawa. And there's 44,000 families on social assistance. And there's been a 50% increase in rental costs. Housing allowances for 2021, if you're on Ontario Works, you get $390. And if you're on Ontario Disability, it's $497. Even the basic unit that if you can get one is $1,000 in the Ottawa area. And when we did this, the prices have actually gone up since then. And in 2021, the community housing has provided housing for 12,800 households. And the average wait time for Ottawa housing is 6 to 8 years. So we have a real problem in this area. Next slide, please, Clint. So the approximately 57,500 of the households are in need. The one thing is 12% of the Ottawa Indigenous families were homeless. Although we only represent 1.5% of the total population, 12% of them are Indigenous, and 30% of Ottawa Indigenous children are in poverty. These are staggering numbers, and they've only, in our recent stats, they've actually only gotten worse. There's also one of the issues that of money is because of the lack of capital for Indigenous people moving off reserves. And on-reserve housing plays a big part in this lack of capital. Corolla, did you want to talk to this at all? No? Okay. So what happens is when if you're in if you have housing on a reserve, in most cases, there's no way that you can capitalize. And if you need to move into the cities for healthcare, for education, for jobs, you're coming into the city and you actually have no capital. You can't sell a house, or for those reserves that do have housing scripts, you can't sell it to anybody off the reserve. So they actually have a lack of capital, so they can't sell a house where they were and come and get affordable housing in any of the cities in Canada. So that's a big problem, is that lack of capital. And the on-reserve housing plays a big part because it's really lacking in Canada. It's one of those issues that probably just doesn't get enough attention because it is pretty embarrassing how many Indigenous people live in this country. Next slide, please, Clint.
I think Carol did have a comment, her mic was on.
I think this is giving lots of feedback.
Yeah, just use one mic, please. Just use one mic.
Okay,
There we go.
I think Fred addressed it. He started talking about, people don't own their own property or their own houses on reserve, nor is there any funding that's appropriate to house people on reserve. I'll give you an example. In Northeast Alberta, in a small community, we have 28 people living in a 2-bedroom home that's infested with black mold. They have a disabled child, and they literally have to sleep in shifts. So that means one person sleeps for 5 hours, and then the next person jumps in the bed, same sheets, and gets a couple 5 hours, and they continue to go like that. So that's outrageous. We live in 2022, and having 28 people in one home is just not responsible by the government or their communities.
Thanks, Corolla. Next slide, please, Clint. So in order to address the needs, St. Vincent de Paul has entered into an agreement with the Multi-Faith Housing Initiative that I mentioned earlier. And we have 2 projects that we're currently working on. One is the Anchor Project and the other is the Dream Project. The Dream Project is one of the biggest projects around, and we'll be talking about that in more detail in the next coming slides. Providing resources for Indigenous people living on the reserve is part of the issue. Is that I don't know how to describe enough that people living on reserves, I want to watch my words here, but there's no capitalization there. A lot of them are on subsistence living, and they have, a lot of them, their housing is provided by the reserve. I know in our reserve, you can build your own house, but the reserve will also provide you with a house as well. So there's a big, one begats the other. Next slide, please, Clint. And the need is, I think we went through this one, Clint. Go down to the next slide. And the next slide. Right, so the Anchor Project was our first project in conjunction with Multi-Faith Housing and the Anglican Diocese, who had property on Maryvale Road. And we entered an agreement with them to provide or to obtain 6 units for Indigenous people. Now that has been delayed for a bit. So although that's still going to be one of our projects, it is now not our #1 project. Our #1 project is now the Dream Project. Next slide, please, Clint. I think the other direction, Clint. There we go. So the Dream Project is in the early stages, although we will be breaking ground next year. There's 601 total rental units, and Multi-Faith Housing, in conjunction with St. Vincent de Paul, will own 130 of the units, and 59% of them will be of the median market value in perpetuity, and St. Vincent de Paul will be part of that plan. Next, please, Clint. The great thing about this property is that it's I'm going to say it is very Indigenous centric. Effort has been that's gone into this project to make sure that it's welcome for Indigenous. We have the gathering circle. There's facilities inside the building for gatherings for Indigenous people, also for others because there's a shared space. But the focus, since this is Indigenous land, there will be a focus on the Indigenous community. Next slide, please. Also, 5% of the on-site employment hours will go to the Algonquin and other Indigenous people. There'll be apprenticeship opportunities, Indigenous mentoring, and access to skills upgrading. So it's a project that will be not only providing housing for Indigenous people, but also providing job opportunities as well. Next, please, Clint. The timing issues, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the anchor has been delayed, and we're now moving into the Dream project. And we are looking to fundraise 5 to 7 doors for Indigenous units. And we already have reached $130,000 of our goal from our current campaigns and fundraising that we'll talk to in a few minutes. Next slide, please, Clint. Other projects that we're looking at in the future is we're looking at land off. We're looking for the third project. We're looking for land opportunities. Churches in this area are also some of the biggest holders of land assets. So we're hoping that we'll be able to leverage some of those lands for more housing for Indigenous and non-Indigenous families in the future. Next slide, please, Clint. St. Vincent de Paul, as I had mentioned, we have raised $130,000 of our $300,000 commitment, and we're moving along. Next slide. And we've talked about this. The next one, please, Clint. And the next one. The Archbishop Marcel Damphousse has sent a letter to all parishes, and we'll be doing activities in the churches. Right now, the Council of Catholic Bishops has committed $30 million for Indigenous for reconciliation, and this diocese is committed to 1.2 million, and so we're moving heavy into that process in the next few months, and then after that, we'll be moving into aggressively promoting our projects for housing as part of the reconciliation process. Next slide, please, Clint. What we've done to raise funds, catch the Ace raffles, individual donations, St. Vincent de Paul, Ottawa Stores contributions, donations from St. Vincent de Paul, Ontario Council. I can't tell you, this has been a great partnership. Not only do we get to leverage St. Vincent de Paul, but we've leveraged the Knights of Columbus, churches, religious orders, and the Bishop's Reconciliation Fund. We also go to grocery stores and other organizations. But you notice on here, we don't have a lot of government funds, right? We're doing this on our own because it is so urgent. If we wait for government, we've been waiting for government for over 150 years. So I think that the focus that I've been trying to focus in how do we partner with the non-Indigenous population to get things done, because I don't think things are critical and we need to move on some of these issues right away. Next slide, please. What can others do for affordable housing? I gave a speech to the Canadian Bankers Association about the issues about if you're coming off a reserve and you have no capital, how do we get people into housing without that capitalization? Businesses can do more. Community groups such as Multi-Faith Housing, St. Vincent de Paul. We have the Jewish community and the Muslim community fully engaged. Developers. The one thing that Toronto has done very well is that if you're doing any new builds, you have to have a certain proportion of those that will be for low-income families. That's not the case in Ottawa, but I'm hoping that's something that we can do in the future. Unions can become involved, and we can start just by becoming informed, and that's why hopefully that people will get some ideas from tonight's presentation. Next slide, please, Clint. That's it for my part. Carola, is there anything that you wanted to add or continue on? And Clint, I'm done.
good to see those numbers up there. I think, what I want to talk about is that, you know, for Indigenous people, when we look like, especially moving into tomorrow about finding ways to reconcile, what does reconciliation look like in action? Well, when you look at our people, they've been houseless in their own land for decades and decades. And I believe it's the inherent right of every Aboriginal person on Turtle Island to be housed in their own land. And so that's part of reconciliation, is providing adequate housing. I want to talk a little bit about what we do at Niiganan. It's not a very old organization. There were 7 tenacious Métis, First Nation, and Inuit women that were social workers, caregivers, healthcare aides, that saw the disparaging differences in the way our people were treated in housing. And they came together and they lobbied government for well over 7 years before they were able to get capital money to build Ambrose Place. So Ambrose Place was designed to house the absolutely most vulnerable. So those people that came to us at Ambrose had chronic addictions, chronic mental health problems, physical health problems, and they were spiritually bankrupt. And so when we started to house these people, I had no thought that I would be in the work of helping people pass to the spirit world. I had no thought that I would actually have people sobering up and moving out onto their own. I just knew that I needed to accept our people where they were at and surround them with love and choices to change their own life. And so that's what we did at Ambrose. And Niiganan housing is based totally on an Indigenous way of knowing and being. And so we don't manage by objectives, we manage by valued relationships, which is completely different than the way colonized organizations operate. And so it was a bit of a head turning for a lot of people in government that I worked with. And in many ways, I felt like I was forced into running a building that was underfunded. Like when I started, I was only given $975,000 to run a $13 million building that housed 45, 50 tenants. Well, I was able to take it on, and I said, no, they're not. We're going to show them that we as Indigenous people can do something different and better for our people. And so I found ways to bring other money in to support us to be able to build the program. We had absolutely no money for programming at all. No money to take people camping or to ceremony or on the land. And from where I come from, I understand that we as human beings come from the land. And in order for us to heal, we need to be on the land. And so I had to find money really fast to help me start to do that movement. Within 2 years of running Ambrose Place, we were able to save the provincial government just in infrastructure costs, and that's not including policing, strictly in healthcare, $7 million. $7 million in 2 years for 45 people. When the building costs 13, it's a no-brainer to house people that are houseless. You save money, you save lives, and you change the trajectory of their movement with society. And what we've seen in many of our builds, like we're only moving into our 8th year now, and we have 5 builds, like we have just been skyrocketing in. And I believe that part of the reason we are moving so quickly and so fast is we're still in the year of the woman's pipe and we'll be there for another 2 years. And it's told to me by those old people that when the woman's pipe is in charge, things will move with the people much faster. And I've seen that, like, from one building, I have 6 buildings now, and the city is coming to me and asking me to take over other hotels. And we are considered in Canada gold standard permanent supportive housing. And it's because people's lives are changed by living there with us. And we treat them like family, and we run it like a community. We opened Omamu Wangugamik, so that's our family housing, because before I retired, I wanted to say to government, you guys have been doing this backwards, and I'm going to show you there's a different way to keep families intact. And so we were able, when we opened the doors at Omamu Wangugamik, to house, at the beginning, we housed 7 pregnant women that were red flagged to have their child apprehended once they gave birth, because they were living on the streets, they were active in their addictions, all of those disruptors that our people live with. And I'm happy to say that we've had 15 babies born on site. Everyone is intact with their own parent. They take traditional parenting. We've brought 5 children back out of the system to their natural parents, and we will continue to do this. That's the difference that we're making. We provide wraparound supports with live-in mushrooms and cookums. The 7th floor is full of mushrooms and cookums, grandparents, and they grandparent everybody in that building, including the single people. And what's happened as I've seen this community grow is that we have natural Nakawas and Notawas, like aunties and uncles, that start to get involved in the community and want to help, and people will help babysit instead of, you know, a mother that needs a break from their kid going out and leaving their kid alone, and then social services coming in and scooping them. That doesn't happen. They trust us and they let us know that they need a break, and we make sure that there's people there to help them get that break. So I think housing our people, and when I'm talking about First Nations and Métis and Inuit people, the way we have to house them is the way that makes sense to them. It's the way they connect with ceremony, with the land, with each other, how we live very collectively. We're nosy neighbors. We care about what's going on. So we're going to come and say, what's going on here? I noticed you were out of your apartment in the middle of the night, and I know you got a 9-month-old baby, like what's going on? But those kinds of things help save those children from being apprehended, and they help their parents learn to be more responsible and actually learn for help and not be afraid that they are going to have their children removed because they need a break. So I think there's a different way of housing our people. I know that marketing housing doesn't work because they go into marketing housing, and like all of us, we're related to everybody on the street. I've got relatives here today, and we invite everybody in, and then we have too many people in our house and we get kicked out. So we take that responsibility away and we manage guests. And we say who can come in and who can't come in. And it takes the stress off of that individual not supplying a space, because in your heart, you want to bring everybody home. I just think that for people to really step up to the plate, we need to look at how to create more housing opportunities, especially like I'm just dealing with permanent supportive housing. We haven't really even moved, although we will, into affordable housing and actually owning houses. There's a way to do this, but we need supports from all kinds of other places. When I look at what's going on in Edmonton, you know, the city built 5 projects. They can't find funds to operate them. We have people dying on the street every day. We have over 200,000 people in Edmonton houses on the streets. Winter's coming. We have 5 empty buildings. We don't have any operational money. So one of those buildings is being given to me, so I'm going all over trying to find funds to staff, to cover my costs for staffing. So I think industry, like, you know, big businesses need to come and say, as part of reconciliation, we want to sponsor this building, or we want to help somehow. There's all kinds of ways to help, even if it's just volunteering. But to me, providing adequate housing for the original people is so imperative. That speaks to reconciliation. They opened the doors to all the settlers that came. They provided housing for them when they arrived. They kept them alive through the first winter. They continued to give and give and give because that's part of our value system. And now look at our people. They're the ones, 73% of the people that are houseless in Edmonton are Indigenous. 93% of the kids in care are Indigenous. Like something is wrong, something isn't working. And that's why we at Niiganan Housing believe we are doing something different. And we're going to give those children that are born at Omamu Wangugamik, it's my dream that their children will never see the light of foster care. Because to me, children's services and foster care is just a step up from residential school. Because it takes them away from the land, their culture, and their ceremony. Except.
Oh, thank you to both of you. Yeah, it's a beautiful snapshot of what's happening in Eastern Canada and what's happening in Western Canada, right here in Edmonton. So we want to open it up now to kind of a sharing whatever questions, answers, but I'm a little selfish. I want to go first. Is that okay? Brad, what struck me about your presentation was how you were able to find partners and even the church, the cooperation. That was amazing. That really struck me. How did you do that? I know we've got a building here. We wish the Oblates would have given to the Indigenous, and now we turned it to the diocese, and it's an empty building right here, and could be used. And so, how did you do it?
Well, basically, I was on 2 other boards before that, Medallion and Gignold in Ottawa. And like I mentioned, my good friend Brian DePape, who is one of the executives for St. Vincent de Paul, mentioned that they wanted to move into the housing category, and then he started to get me engaged because they were new to housing, and I did have some experience in moving into the space, and so this seemed like a new opportunity for me. It was a new start, and also it fits better with my philosophy is that we need to engage all partners in reconciliation, not just government, not just churches. One of the things that Carola had also mentioned that really rings true is the poverty of spirituality. And with the issues of this, we're living in a secular society, and we're trying to deal with a group that's very spiritual. And I believe that Indigenous people are very spiritual people, but there's been this disconnect. And I think that's also part of the problem that leads to some of the items that Carola had mentioned about the addictions and the loss of a lot of information. So I think moving into the St. Vincent de Paul was better for me because I want to start reintroducing and making the general public know that faith is very important to the Indigenous people. Either it could be their traditional faith, or it could be faiths that they've adopted over time. But I think that the faith is so important for the whole healing process for the Indigenous population.
All right, thank you. And Carola, what struck me about your presentation, when you talked about there's a different way of housing for the indigenous peoples. That I haven't really thought about that much before. I think that's striking. That's important. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
When I say that there needs to be a different way to house our people, Fred's right. Our people are very spiritually connected, but we're also connected to the land. And many of our ceremonies happen on the land. And it was like, that's the first thing I did. Was build that ceremonial room and have our medicines, like you saw this evening, burning in there. And when those medicines begin to burn, they do the work. They start to work on the people and they start to work on the building. And then we have people like Lloyd that come in and drum and sing, and we pray together in the morning, and we start the day off in a good way. And even if that individual ends up on the street and imbibing, they still had a good start to the day. And maybe the next day that it's going to be different. And so when I talk about that opportunity to take people to the land, if you were able to see through my eyes what happens when we take people to our fasting lodges, to our Sundance lodges, to our chicken dances. We just hosted a chicken dance a month ago, and we didn't have enough room for the outside people to come in. They were all on the outside, but they were there supporting us, which is incredible. That means people from our sites were coming and staying in ceremony. Like some of them sat, it was an all-night ceremony. It didn't end until 6 o'clock in the morning. Many of them came and got their spirit names. Many of them came and got blessings for their families. Many of them were looking for that reunification with their nation. And my daughter brought a friend of hers, and the friend said, are these all people that are houseless? Are these all people that they have mental health issues and they're all normal? That's what ceremony does. When we're given an opportunity to be in ceremony and sit on Mother Earth and burn our medicines and pray and sing together, our life transforms. And that's the difference. It's that whole thing. We're managed by valued relationships between you and me and the land, me and my four-legged relatives, the winged ones, the crawlers, the swimmers. We're all related. And the more we understand who we are as Nehewak, four-layered people. We have a physical part, a spiritual part, the emotional part, and a mental part. Thank you. And all of those need to be working in tandem. And that's how we work at Ambrose. That makes a difference.
All right, well, thanks to both of you. I guess I can't be too selfish and open it up now to everybody else. So we have a microphone here.
Just use the one, if you don't mind. It's not ringing.
Yeah, well, I'll see if somebody wants from there to shut this one off.
Oh,
Yeah. So either online or
Hello.
in the
Yes, my name is Edward Lavalley. I'm Vice President of the Edmonton Aboriginal Senior Center here in Edmonton. I'm also an elder. I've been living in Edmonton for the last 40 years. And yes, this topic of trying to help us Aboriginal people in our housing, as we know that the half the Aboriginal populations now have moved on to the senior urban centers across Canada, and so there is a great need for housing assistance to Aboriginal, those families, elders, young people that are making urban centers their homes. And I know that the government of Canada has pouring some money, quite a bit of money to, we know that, say, the Homer Trust in Edmonton, our district in Edmonton, Homer Trust has been in charge of helping and providing housing needs of Aboriginal people in the city for the last 10 years. I think they have been giving an extension of 1 more year to help us with our housing needs. And then another organization is good to take over. But yes, I do appreciate the churches like in Ottawa wanting to get involved in reconciliation process and in housing for Aboriginal people. That's very good, but hey, they're not only providing a housing, a very small percentage of the houses that they are willing to help build for the increased population that are now making Ottawa their home. So I think that what we need is a national organization of some kind, or we need a national movement to give us, find out the Aboriginal housing needs in urban centers across Canada, and find out how we can help Aboriginal people their housing needs in the urban centers. Some years back, the Department of Indian Affairs built houses for Treaty Indians in cities, and that helped them very long, but they discontinued that process. Here in Edmonton, we do have Métis Urban Housing, which is doing a very good job for the Métis population, and not only Métis, they provide housing also for Indigenous people. And so we need more of this kind of activity. I really appreciate the Corolla's effort in helping our Indigenous population have alcohol and drug problems, and they're doing a very good job in helping these people. But we need some sort of organization to really do this work in a very constructive way. Yeah, that's my start. Thank you very much.
Oh, hey, thank you. Good to hear wisdom from another elder. Fred or Carola, do you want to comment on?
Just to say, he's absolutely right. Like, there's a need for housing, affordable housing, a chance to be ownership, a chance to actually invest in your own housing. We just need more opportunities to provide better housing for our people.
Although ours, we're just starting, St. Vincent de Paul is starting, and it may seem like, the 4 to 10 units that we're looking at, we're providing, the multi-faith housing initiative who we're partnering with are providing 60 units for Indigenous. And the Anchor project is going to provide even more. So there's an interesting book by Ira Rosenberg called Small Steps. And I think it's an important document that if we try to solve all the problem all at once, it's doomed to failure. But I think the small steps with grassroots organizations can do a better job. And speaking about the homelessness issue, although there's only 44% Indigenous in Ottawa, they represent 32% of the homeless that are living on the streets in this town. Since I think, like Edmonton, Ottawa is a catchment area for Indigenous people, for hospitals and for other key services, so they tend to migrate here. And with the lack of capital, I think that just exacerbates it, because where do you live when you have no capital? It's a fundamental question we don't deal with when we don't live on a reserve, or if we gain capital over time. But for those just migrating off the reserve, there's just none there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments in the room or online?
I have a comment.
Yes, Lloyd?
So, what I think about when it comes to like Indigenous people in an urban context, I guess, but you know, for me, I can't separate it being connected to our homelands and the loss of our homelands and stuff, because I myself, I am in the city because I'm displaced and disenfranchised, right? And I'm also both like Métis and Treaty, and explain that one to the federal government, right? But at the same time, it's kind of interesting because my grandparents, well, my grandfather and my father, they come from a place called Wolf Lake, and Wolf Lake is one of 12 Métis settlements. In Alberta, at the time, there was 12 Métis settlements. Now there's 8, I think. And Alberta is the only province that recognizes land-based Métis. But, you know, also my great-grandfather, his name was Francois Louis Joseph Xavier Cardinal. They gave him a lot of names back in the day, right? He was a Treaty Indian from the Pieces band. That's where we get that last name Cardinal. It's the little red cardinal bird. And, you know, the interesting thing with him is that he was a Treaty Indian, and he signed something called scrip, not with a T, but with a P. And you know what? They took away his treaty rights, and he instantly became Métis, right? So at the time, in the early 1900s, they probably got rid of about 30 bands and stuff, and they were promised Wolf Lake, and you know, they went to Wolf Lake, and they lived there, and that was a place, it was a community, there was hunting, there was trapping, there was living off the land, like in the traditional way of life. And then they were forced off of the land. And this happened on May 6, 1960. And the land was rescinded, the rights were given away, and the people were forced off of the land that day. They were told to take what they can and to leave, right? And you know, the interesting thing is that my grandfather served in World War II, and you know, 20 years after he came back, that's what he faced, that reality. And you know what, he was actually known for saying no to them. He bought his fenced quarter section of land. They had trap lines north of the lake. They were crown agreements, a township 6 miles by 6 miles. They couldn't take that from them. And you know what, my grandfather stayed, but many of my family were displaced, and they went different places like Saddle Lake Cremation, Onion Lake. I'm related even to people up in East Prairie, because people from Wolf Lake went that far. And you know, the interesting thing is that like in my own little journey, I had to learn about that on my own, right? And or with the help of Creator, about myself, to even understand why I ended up in the city, right? And why so many of my family members ended up in the city. And so many of my family members have died on the streets in the city at young ages, right? If you guys don't know, I have other friends that work in these kind of areas and stuff, and the life expectancy of a man in Saddle Lake is 55 years old. You know, you think about that reality. What has happened, and why is it so disproportionate, right, for Indigenous people. And another thing too, like even in an urban context, you can't go by the statistics. Because guess what? The statistics are from 2015. This fall, they'll release the new census data, right, that they've gathered, but even how they collect data, disaggregated data, when it comes to even just Indigenous people, we are in a completely different area, but we also fall under different things. But the real issue is that Indigenous people are in the city and they're disenfranchised and they're disconnected from their bands, from their settlements. They're not treaty. The biggest thing that the Indigenous people that like I know about, and I don't speak on behalf of all Indigenous people, is identity. And that stems from the trauma and the infliction of the Indian residential schools within our nations. I just want to say that, you know, it's interesting because, like in the city, you know, I've heard different people tell me like Indigenous people are mourning their identity. It's not so much about a physical structure. You know, that's not the solution for Indigenous people. Indigenous people need to return to their roots, right? And, you know, I just want to say that being in the city, like for Indigenous people, when they're in the city, they're off reserve or they're not on their Métis settlements, well, then the responsibility is not wanted by the provincial, the federal and provincial government. And guess what? Because they don't want to pay for them off of those places, right? So guess what? The responsibility falls upon the municipality. And we see what's happening now, right? She just spoke about that reality, right? And see, many Indigenous people, you know, like there's like, I call them like little agents of reconciliation, are working to restore that within the Indigenous people, working with youth, like education plays a role. And you know what, recently the Pope came to visit, right? And he talked about some of this stuff. He talked about how education needs to change and evolve. He talked about the roots of the tree and how people need to learn from Indigenous people about those roots, right? You know, I just want to say that I think about how you have to understand what has happened in order to move forward. And you know what? Like with so many Indigenous people in our city, you know, like I believe that there's a shift that's taking place now. Like things are slow. People are beginning to acknowledge it and they're beginning to understand. But what's going on in our inner city stems from colonization. It stems from the history and the impacts of it, like, you know, with everything that has happened to Indigenous people, right? And you know, like if you even look at reserves, how were they designed in the first place? Why were they designed? So that Indigenous people would face poverty on them and then flock to the cities, right? And when you say marginalized, marginalized means pushed to the limits, right? And see, poverty gets pushed to the center of our city. It's pushed, it's probably like that in other cities. But at the same time, unless we are willing to actually go to where the root cause of that is, like where it began, where it started, then we'll always be stuck where we are. And you know what, I'm just gonna say it honestly, we also need Indigenous people taking care of Indigenous people, because we know how to take care of our people. We always have, right? I don't know, I don't want to go on it like too much anymore, but this is something that, you know, like we have been working on in our community for a long time now. You know what I mean? And things don't change. And you know what? It's time that people heard our voices and learned from us, right? And at the same time, like just give Indigenous people that opportunity and that chance. Because when you give somebody an opportunity and a chance, great things can happen. That's all I want to say. So thanks.
Thank you for sharing that with my class. So young, so wise. Actually, it reminded me of Lewis Cardinal, who is related, I think. Yeah,
No, it's not. Just, well, yeah, to her, yeah.
to her, yeah, when he was one of our speakers here, and he kind of built a self because I think it couldn't come, so he came to replace her. And he sent me an email the next day thanking us for giving him a voice. I thought we owe him a debt of gratitude, but he, you know, it was good. It was just good to hear that. Anybody, Fred, or did you want, Carol, do you want to comment on?
No, no, we're good.
Any other question in on site here or in person, I should say, or online?
Just a comment, I think. Just a comment, and Fred, I appreciate those works that you're doing there. And Corolla, wow, what a huge undertaking, what a beautiful, beautiful undertaking. And what it witnesses to me is exactly what I as a Christian want to be. I want to be in service of those and walking with, not just in service of, walking with people who have the greatest, are the most oppressed. Let's put it that way, are the most oppressed and need to be raised up. But what I'm hearing and what I'm appreciating hearing, because we just heard the Shoal Lake story, Freedom 40 Road, we just heard about it and how the community dug in and they were looking after themselves and they were advocating for themselves, but then they had partners and the churches got involved. We heard this on the weekend, this past weekend, and then the churches got involved, but their advocacy was to support the Indigenous community, to let them support themselves. And part of it was that 60% of their people were employed for the highway that was built and for the water plant that was built. And so that would be my, I guess, my hope is that going forward, it's more indigenized rather than us. Yeah, it's consultation and then support, right? Consultation, support, and walking with. Yeah. But it's all good work and it's true, the little steps matter, everything matters, but we gotta, and I do think, Edward, it was that said about we need organization across the country for that kind of thing. I think we do. And maybe that'll happen just by speaking it. It's called a declaration. You make a declaration and then it happens. So I hope it happens, Edward. There's someone online there.
Okay, online, yeah, go ahead.
Is that Jewel?
Sure.
Yes, it is.
Oh, Jewel.
Hi. I had an experience this past week and it actually reinforces, I think, partly what you were saying is this person made a comment about in a store behind me in line, cursing about what the heck is this Indigenous Truth and Reconciliation Day. And I've never been a person who would speak out in that kind of situation. As a Métis, I was quiet, sat back, didn't know a lot about who I was and what I was and had to learn. But I spoke up, not in anger and not fiercely or anything, but truthfully turned and spoke to that person. And I felt empowered. And I think we need to speak up more and feel more empowered and take care of our own more. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jewel.
Thank you. Said a lot. Any other comments or questions online or in the room? Or Fred or Corolla, if you want to add anything?
As mentioned, I just think it's good that we're having the discussions. I want to thank everybody for keeping these discussions going and informing people. I think it's very important.
Thank you.
I'll just say something very brief. It's really exciting what we're hearing tonight. For many years, I lived about 3 blocks from Ambrose Place. And it's not that many years ago that the construction of that building had been stopped. It was half built, incomplete, and stuck by lawyers and whatever. And to hear the growth, it's thriving, it's multiple buildings. The impact it's making is really extraordinary. So congratulations. I mean, it's amazing what's happened in a relatively brief time. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob, for affirming that. I'll have to go there. Nicole, go ahead, unmute and.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for sharing, everyone. I have a question as a non-Indigenous person. I see the injustice. I recognize my white privilege. And I feel helpless sometimes. I see little changes happening. I'm a teacher in Saskatoon with the Catholic School Division, and I see many things starting to change, but very slow. So my question would be, you know, how, and I know there are more people like me that I work with and in my own families that want to do something, but we just don't know where to start. And so I would just ask if there was even just, you know, a simple 1 or 2 things that I could do to pass on to people.
Good question. I think probably a question from many of them. Corolla or Fred, you want to respond to that?
I think that basically being part of this, Nicole, I think is important. Hopefully it's about getting people engaged in these nonprofit organizations where it does take volunteer time. Everybody that's been working on our project that is developing these properties, none of us get paid. So it's about, like, we're all retired, or most of us are retired. So we're turning our assets towards something that we feel is beneficial to our community. So hopefully, one of our biggest challenges, I believe there's lots of money there. It's getting volunteers to create boards and partnerships so that they can create these properties. As like I said, we have properties, and in many organizations, we physically can't get people to volunteer to be part of the boards, and these boards are very critical to moving any of these issues along. So I think what you're doing is great, and just becoming involved in creating a board, partnering with some of your local communities that have nonprofit housing corporations. Talk to them and say, well, what can we do? Are you looking at a new building? Do you have property where they can build on? That's going to be the biggest issue. Building is really not that hard. It's really getting property in an urban center at an affordable cost. So these are the little things that you can do, and hopefully with St. Vincent de Paul, we'll be hopefully propagating this, what we've done across Canada, and to get other people engaged, because I think it's a good working model. Does that help, Nicole?
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Fred. I'd like to add two things that came to me just listening tonight is what you're doing already, Nicole, from Saskatoon, becoming informed. You know, just participating. And I think we're all doing that tonight, just becoming more informed. The other one, I think, for the point of finding sponsors. Yeah, I guess we can try to move in that direction. Did you want to add something, Corolla? Because you've done it.
I think for many of the grassroots, nonprofit Indigenous organizations. They struggle to gain funds to do the work that's so necessary. I look at big places like United Way, and they never showcase any Aboriginal group that's in need of support. You know, there's a little thing on the bottom. If you know of any other organization you wish to donate, then you can put their name down. Well, why aren't they showcasing some of the Indigenous groups where, you know, lots of unions send all their money that they donate to some Indigenous groups? So that's one way. The other way is you gotta quit asking us to do all the heavy lifting. What can you do? I'll throw it back at you. What can you do to help the reconciliation process? Because I can tell you a whole bunch of things, but I want the rest of the world to start thinking about what they can do. I don't, you know, we've had to heavy lift for so many years. We've had to educate, we've had to tell our story. Even finding all of these bodies, they're not even reporting it correctly. Like they're saying the last count was 1,100 bodies. Well, that's incorrect. There's over 5,600 bodies that have already been found. They're projecting 20,000. Like, why aren't we hearing about this? Why aren't people concerned about this? That's the longest living Holocaust any group of people have had to endure. So you talk, you tell our story, and help us do the heavy lifting.
I'd just like to say for even just that word alone, have conversations about reconciliation, because reconciliation is not necessarily a word that Indigenous people use or understand. I can also say that, you know, like reconciliation, from my understanding, is a biblical word, and it talks about being reconciled with God, right? The Apostle Paul talked about it in the New Testament. But when you say reconciliation to Indigenous people, they go to our elders out on the land and they tell them, well, you need to come to the city because they need to have reconciliation with you. And then I heard that the response of some of our elders is, well, I've done nothing wrong. What do I need to reconcile? Right? And then at the same time, like when you get into government and community, right? Reconciliation means different things to different people. You know, it's like a buzzword that floats around in the air, and every once in a while somebody will reach up and grab it, talk a little bit about it like I am right now, and then they'll let it go back up into the air again. You know, reconciliation for the governments, you know, like it means fitting us into their policies, fitting us into their systems. And you know what, we don't fit in there. And you know, we kind of never fit in there. And you know, I always say you can't fit a circle into a box, right? And so, you know, reconciliation to Indigenous people means honoring the treaties. You know, it means self-governance, it means sovereignty, it means you know, in a sense, autonomy for our own people. And you know, we agreed to that. You know, like peace and friendship. This is Treaty 6 territory. You know, we're all treaty people. You know, don't say that to the Métis. I'm joking, but at the same time, just acknowledging and honoring, right, the agreements, right? And you know, like Indigenous people have always, in a sense, done it in the right way. You know, they've always participated in the right way, and I think that just having those conversations and understanding that you might be thinking reconciliation, but you know, like if you're sitting with a group of Indigenous people, your thought process on that one word alone will be completely different. So it's all about perspectives also, right?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. That kind of reminded me of one other thing about reconciliation. Somebody said this has to do with land. And, you know, and returning all the land is impossible. Returning none of it is not just. That makes a lot of sense too. And not one of our, especially the clothing one, the last one will be on land. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Okay, then, so if there are burning questions out there, if not, we'll start beginning to wrap up. Because our little closing ritual sort of leads into the default question, what can we do? So I think we'll move to our closing the last part of our ritual. So the question of mic's working or not? And there we go. Okay. Are we ready? Yeah. Okay. So we close our evening with the last part of the ritual and the statement. Housing is a basic right to enjoy a dignified life. As a sign of commitment to moving forward together, to reconciliation, we put the fallen placards back around the house and perhaps suggest new measures we can take so that we can all enjoy decent housing.
Identity.
Identity.
Shelter. Intimacy. Belonging. Stability. Make it
It's
stable.
not very stable.
And security.
And are there other things? Just shout them out nice and loud so the microphone picks you up online, or anything else that we can do. Anybody else has thought of?
We are all related.
We are all related.
Community.
Community,
Myopi-Matsuen.
Myopi-Matsuen,
Good life.
good life, living well.
I think I'd just like to reiterate what you said, that the heavy lifting. And I think, you know, that is on non-Indigenous peoples to step up and start getting educated. It's a long process. There's lots to learn. And just to recognize that that's on us, like that's what we have to do, because like you said, if you don't know the story, if you don't know what's happened, then how can you move forward? And so, like, as educators, a retired teacher for 10 years, when I was teaching, I didn't have a lot to use. And so I hope that what I was learning was correct, and that, but the idea of planting seeds, and it doesn't have to be curriculum, you know, like just planting those seeds in the children and just going from there, just even talking about, well, if you are a beneficiary, you have an obligation, and just those kinds of ideas to be letting kids know. So, and if you know, like-minded teachers get together, because the new curriculums that are coming out, I really worry about who is going to teach them, and that is critical. So if you're going to have someone who is not sympathetic, I think it can never be good. So yeah, heavy lifting.
Yes, stepping up to the plate for non-Indigenous. Collectively lifting, yeah. Sharing the heavy lifting, educating ourselves and sharing what we've learned. Good. Forming allies.
Cynthia online.
Online, somebody?
Oh, yes,
Cynthia?
sorry. Cynthia Perry here from St. John, New Brunswick. I just would like to follow up with our last speaker who was talking about education. I always like to put a plug for this every opportunity I have, but there's a very good program that I have gone through You might be aware of it. It's called Listening to Indigenous Voices by the Jesuit Forum out of Toronto. You could buy the booklet, very well done. And then there's like, I think 10 sessions, very involved. It goes through, there's photos, there's videos, there's maps, there's interactive maps, all following for non-Indigenous people to really understand, you know, the history and what's happening today. So, and once we're educated like that, you know, then I think we can make those decisions, you know, and really understand our responsibility going forward. But it's excellent, you know, it would be excellent for the later high school years as well.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you for pointing that out. We have that here, we've been using it. And you're from the Maritimes?
Yes, from St. John.
Going on midnight your time, or close to it. Congratulations, thank you.
You're
That'd be
welcome.
great.
Thank you.
Somebody else? Jewel?
Hi, I was thinking about when you're talking about housing, I don't know the words to use, but I was thinking we need to accommodate people with different mobility issues. And I don't know if that's in there in the different words that you're using.
Okay.
Whether the person is young and has a mobility issue, or whether the person is elderly and has mobility issues, accommodations that fits their physical needs as well as their other needs.
All right, thank you. We've been doing that here at the Star as well recently, more accessibility. Okay, I think that pretty well takes us to the time we want to close, and I'd like to invite, oops, we have somebody.
I think Fred.
Fred, did you have a comment?
No, none. I was just playing with my face. Sorry. I'm good.
Okay. We'd like to invite Carol to come up and just maybe share a prayer with us.
I was gonna ask Fred to pray because he's older than me.
Okay, Fred, guess what? We're passing this to you. You're still awake and you're older apparently, so you're the
I'm
elder.
still here.
Do you want to just share a prayer with us?
Yeah, a little short prayer. If people could stand, although those that are on a computer can just stay seated. A short prayer. Great spirit of our grandfathers and grandmothers. We raise our spirit to our messenger, the four winds, to Mother Earth and to Father Sky, who provide for all our food and our nourishment and the beautiful planet that we live on. Thank you, Creator, for this time together where we get to express our thoughts and feelings and share ideas. And hopefully we can work together to solve some of the more taxing issues affecting Indigenous in this country. We ask this in all of our ancestors' Miigwech.
Hey, thank you. Hi. And thank you. I want to thank, I have here just for a couple closing comments. I want to thank St. Vincent de Paul Society for recommending Fred. I'm their national chaplain, so I was asking them who could do on housing. And I want to thank Father Susai for recommending Lloyd. I asked him who could do a drum song for us. So Susai is now in India, so we got you here. And Bob McKeon for recommending for Ian, for Bob McKeon suggesting you. Thank you very much. And thank all of you for, let's give a hand to all of our presenters.